Alright folks, in this first ever full-length video on the Tech Transfigurations channel, Totoro and I are going to be repairing and restoring this old, broken, discolored Wiimote that I got. I picked it up off Facebook Marketplace the other day, and it wasn't working too well. Some of the buttons were sticking, had troubles connecting, so thought it'd be a great way to kick things off. So Totoro's going to keep an eye on me as I go through. Just got to pick out the right screwdrivers for this. Nintendo uses these weird triangle-shaped screws. If you haven't seen them before, it makes it really hard for people like me and you to open these things up, so you have to get special screwdrivers for it. Luckily, even if you're cheap like me, you usually pick them up online at Amazon or AliExpress or anywhere for a couple bucks. I think I paid like 15 bucks for my whole kit and got everything I needed. So, first things first, safety first, remove the batteries. I have shocked myself before. Don't shock yourself. So we'll start by removing some of these screws here and get this thing open. You'll notice that as I remove the screws, I keep them super organized in the top left there. There has been many times I've dropped or forgotten a screw and haven't found it again until much later, and I've ruined electronics doing that. So make sure you always keep yourself organized because it's going to help you much more than before. So now just removing the wrist strap here. Not an electronic part, not really going to need too much cleaning, other than I'll just give it a quick shake down outside, make sure I get any old junk or sweat off there, but obviously got to get that out of the way before we work through the rest of this. So now you can see as I was going through, the back was starting to open up a bit, but the front wasn't. So all the screws are actually out of this already. So what you need to do is there's two little hidden clips up front, kind of have to wedge it in there. I just use a little plastic wedge to get it open. The clips are kind of hard sometimes. On some of the Wiimotes I've opened, they actually have snapped. So as I take it out, you'll see a couple of the small loose pieces start to fall out. Mostly just the some of the front buttons, the speaker module, which is not actually connected. It just has two little contacts that keep the sound coming out, as well as some of the rubber covers for the buttons themselves. So we're just going to go through and remove some of those rubber covers. I got my pliers out. Make it a little bit easier to get some of the finer pieces that are just a pain in the butt to get with those big gloves on. Now, some people don't use gloves for these kind of things. Again, I do. Gloves are a great way for making sure you keep yourself protected because safety first. You never know what's inside some of these things. Could be bunches of dust. On a worst case side, it could actually be old dead bugs or something even worse than that. Once I even opened up a camera, an old just normal point and shoot camera, didn't realize that there was a second battery inside that operated the flash and shocked myself. So since then I've always worn gloves every time I take anything apart, even if it's something as simple as this. So it looks like we've got most of the buttons and stuff out of the front side of the case here. Again, just keeping them organized and need to be washed and cleaned later, but for now we're just taking them apart. The speaker also has this little paper film, almost looks like an AeroPress filter if anyone's a coffee nerd like me, but we want to make sure we keep that as well. We're not going to clean that because it'll just fall apart as soon as it hits the water. Alright, now we're going to move into the back of this thing. We got to take the board out of it. The board is actually not held in too much by anything but just friction. It's still a bit of a tough one to get out of there. You see I'm kind of wiggling it to get it out of the casing. And there's a little piece that you have to keep track of there. That's just the infrared cover. And then we're going to take the little black node out of there. It's a little bit stuck. I tried to get it with my hands first. Aren't quite successful. Sometimes these things are just stuck in there and needs a little bit of a firmer push. So I actually end up going for some of my tweezers. I have a second pair of tweezers, a little bit thicker than my fine tweezers, which are really good for anything that requires a little bit more force and not quite as much pinpoint accuracy. Now I'm being very, very careful with this because it's a plastic piece with metal tweezers, and that could very easily break. Luckily, this one did not, so just make sure you're careful if you ever try to take these things apart. Now you see we've pretty much got the whole entire bottom shell taken apart. A little bit of a battery metal piece in there still, but we'll come back to that later. Back on the board itself, we're going to take off the plastic cover. You'll see just a little bit of a rubber contact in there where we usually touch the board when you activate the back trigger button. And at this point, we're almost fully taken apart. Last thing here, you don't need to do this. I choose to because I'm a completionist when it comes to my disassembly here. I want to get that last little piece of metal out of the battery casing. This way, when I do go through and do washing, it's not going to rust or cause any issues with it. Sometimes I take this out, sometimes I don't. In this case, I decided to go all the way and take it out. There is a little small metal tab stuck way inside. That's a pain in the butt to get out. So I take a little break, take out the back trigger button on the Wiimote itself. You can see me, I'm struggling a little bit actually trying to get this thing open. Not the easiest thing. And finally, I just determined I can just get in there and unclip the small little clip using the front of my tweezers. Very difficult to do. You actually have to pull them together and unclip the tiny little clip there. It takes actually a surprising amount of force to do so, but after getting it in there pretty good, bam, pops right out. Didn't break any plastic, didn't break any metal, and that's what you do there. So at this point, we are just about fully disassembled here. There's nothing really left in the bottom casing. And now we're ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be washing all the individual components. Alright, so on to the next step. Now it's time for us to go through and actually clean off the various components, get off any dust, dirt, or grime that might be causing connection issues or any sort of button sticking. First thing you're going to see me do here is actually fill a glass part of the way, not with water, but with white vinegar. This actually works really well for a variety of cleaning purposes. I sometimes use it if I need to clean battery acid actually off of things. It also works well for removing any kind of rust on old controllers or old screws in general. Be careful when you use it because it smells bad and it can ruin various materials. But in this case, I want to use it on the screws to make sure they're all set for when we put things back together. Now the solution on the left there is not anything special. It is a plastic tub from Target filled with dish soap and water. Very simple. As long as you already have your things taken apart well enough, you should be able to go through and use just a simple dishwashing solution. You'll see I get things a little bit wet here. I use a larger size scouring brush. Nothing super harsh. Again, we don't want to scratch things. We don't want to ruin things. Just enough to get off any kind of dirt that's hiding on these large surfaces. Get it all nice and clean. Now, the back, the more specific tiny little pieces you can't really get in there, I actually have, and if you see me searching for it there we go, a toothbrush. Toothbrushes are good for not just brushing teeth, but they are fantastic for small electronics. You'll see me use it again later for another bit of circuit board cleaning, but for now, mostly just want to get into all those little nooks and crannies within the plastic itself and get it nice and clean. So you're not going to have to sit here and watch me wash every single one of these items. I'll speed it up in a little bit. But for now, you can see that whenever I do these kind of washing on plastics, it's very simple. Dish soap, water, and give it a quick scrub. Now this won't get everything. Sometimes you have some sort of scratches to repair. But you know what? It at least does the most of things need to get done here. Now we're going to speed things up. See me work through first the back of it. Now the bottom shell, same thing. Using these toothbrush to get into all those little nooks and crannies. Really want to get in there because honestly it's probably not going to get cleaned as much as it ever does, as it does right now. Again, all small little pieces. All those little rubber pads. Yes, those rubber pads can be cleaned with soap and water. Nothing super fancy there. When we get to the tiny little buttons, it gets really tough to grip them sometimes. So what you'll see me actually start to do here is I hold it in the palm of my hand and almost scrub it within the palm of my hand. And on top of creating like a really cool sound, check my second channel for the uncut video. Be listening to washing these kind of things. But it also makes it really easy to make sure you don't lose those pieces. It's not the end of the world if they fall into the giant thing of water, but it is actually a complete pain in the butt to try to fish them back out again because you can't see behind all those suds, so you have to bend down, look at it from the side. It's not fun for anyone. So now, you'll see I actually finished going through and washing everything. So we're going to move on to actually cleaning the circuit board itself, the PCB. What we're using here is a 91% isopropyl alcohol solution. This is going to be something that we can use safely on printed circuit boards. There is a really, let's just say there's a really bad things that happen if you try to use water on these things. As everyone knows, electronics and water don't mix. Please try to ignore the fact of the giant spill I made at the top of my protective sheet here. It doesn't have any issues, but I know for some of you, like myself, who are a little bit OCD, it's going to drive you crazy. Anyway, you see I just take that same clean toothbrush, dip it in the isopropyl alcohol, and I'm just going to give each of the little components a quick scrub. By using 91% isopropyl alcohol, everything actually will evaporate very quickly after we scrub it off. The net result meaning that there's no damage to the underlying electronics. So I'm brushing very lightly here, just enough to try to get any kind of dirt or grime off of there, any kind of discoloration. I'm working within the actual controller port as well, where it connects to the nunchuck. Being very, very careful with it, but just firm enough to make sure there's nothing on there. When I was cleaning it, I did notice there really wasn't too much dirt or grime on there. Give Totoro a little pat, and did a good job there. And then finally moving on to just a little bit again on those metal battery contacts. They were still pretty clean. There wasn't any battery acid or rust like I've seen on some other devices, so it didn't take too much. And with that, we move on to the final step, my personal favorite, which is the actual reassembly of the whole thing. Reassembly is just like Legos. For those of you who are like myself, who grew up on Legos, it is a ton of fun to put things back together. That being said, there's no really instructions for putting things back together. Yes, you could look one up online. Yes, give Totoro a pat. It's almost done here. Yes, you could look up your instructions online, but at the end of the day, I find looking back and forth from a guide constantly is a good way to lose things. So I will use it obviously on new builds that I've never worked on before, but for things I've done before like Wiimotes and other gaming systems, I try to make sure that I have things organized and I don't lose pieces. So now I'm putting things back together. I take out those same pair of tweezers you've seen before, and what those are going to do is save me a ton of time in putting the buttons back into place. Buttons are really, really hard to pick up, and it's tough to see sometimes, but there's actually a very specific way in which they need to go into the baseboard. Or I should say the outer shell. There's little notches that are on each side of them. So obviously the D-pad right there doesn't have them. But for things like the A button, for the 1 and the 2, and so on and so forth, all the buttons have these little plastic pieces that stick out in various angles. And what those various angles do is make sure that they only go in one specific way. From a usability perspective, this is actually really awesome, because it means you can't possibly put things back the wrong way. This is really helpful so you don't put things back in, put the whole thing back together and realize, wait, it's upside down. So I'm very, very big fan of Nintendo for doing that. Thank you, Nintendo. You make my life a lot easier. I'll forgive you for the weird triangle-shaped screws. So anyway, what you're seeing here is just simply me going through and putting the pieces back in according to their correct orientation. There's quite a few, so it's taking a little bit of time, so I might do a little bit of a fast forward here. All right, fast forward over. I started putting back some of the rubber button covers as well, and getting that little bit of audio back into place as well. This thing's a little bit tough to grip, always a bit of a pain in the butt, but I just gonna kind of move things around a bit, use the tweezers as necessary, and get it back into that required orientation. All in all, not too bad. Wiimotes are one of the simpler products I work on, and actually a really good starting point for anyone just kind of getting into the field. Aside from that clip in the front. That clip in the front that I mentioned at the beginning is a real pain. Anyway, all right, all of our buttons in the front piece of this shell have been inserted. From now, quick jump cut, I'm gonna get the trigger button into its rubber. There we go. Get the trigger button into its plastic housing, which allows the button when pressed to impact the circuit board in the right way and trigger the button response. I'm going to replace the IR cover. And we're just about done here. We're actually doing the final bits of reassembly. This little plastic piece, if you remember correctly, actually snaps right back onto the board itself. There's this little tab, this little bump right in the top left corner that makes it really easy to put it back in the right orientation. And we're going to get that little module back there. It doesn't have to be perfect because this ended up sliding right back into the bottom shell as well. Gave the trigger button a quick test. Everything seems to be in order. And it's time for the final reassembly. A little bit of pressure, make sure it all kind of pushes together. Nothing's forgotten. Perfect. And finally, we're gonna put this down right on top of the front shell. Now we can't really pick up the front piece of the shell and flip it over and put it on, because if we do, all the buttons will fall out. Those things are only held in by gravity right now. So I'm being very, very careful, and see if you can spot the mistake that I made, and see if I'm wondering why it's not going together. And you guessed it, I put it on backwards. And there we go. It's harder than you think to put these things together while filming. Much easier when I can get my face about 2 inches from it and just stare at it. But anyway, it just kind of pushes back together. We snap those two front latches, and the whole thing is mostly reassembled. We're gonna replace the piece of metal that we took out for the battery contacts, because it just has a plastic clip inside that you connect to the metal clip. Super easy to just pop it back in there. Perfect. Now, don't think we forgot the last most important piece, the screws. This was actually a jump cut to about a couple hours later, when the screws had finished going through the vinegar solution, and we're gonna put them right back in there. Okay, and there is our almost last pieces here, and moving on to the last one. Get yourself a metal tip screwdriver, makes things much, much, much easier. All right, and trying to make sure the threads catch correctly. And boom. Last screw in, and at this point we are reassembled. All that's left is to test it. So let's give a quick test of all the buttons here. Everything seems to be in working order. 1, 2, trigger button. Everything mostly going according to plan. So last piece we want to try, make sure it turns on. Good tool, Amazon Basics batteries. Shout out to my good friends at Amazon Basics for making things that work great for a great price. Not sponsored, wish I was. Anyway, put it all together and we get the flashes. Hooray! Looks like things, at least to this stage, are working. What I'll probably do is off screen to give it a test with the actual Wii itself. Totoro is happy as well. It was a team effort, I'll say. It was a team effort. And we're all done. Thanks for joining me.